I'm so glad to be here today and to be moderating for our two distinguished guests. And why did we come here today? Why did we gather here today? Well, since we are the Veritas Forum, we like talking about the big questions. Those big questions that normally do not come up in the classrooms. So that means we are here today to talk about one important topic. And it is a topic of which many people on this campus, in this nation, and in the world think about all the time. That of happiness. And just as important, overcoming its counterpart, depression. So what we want to know here today is what is happiness and how might one go about achieving this excellent state of body and mind. So, being someone who does not understand much about the brain or the mind and their intricacies, I'm here to ask the dumb questions. The dumb questions concerning happiness, the dumb questions concerning depression, sadness, and sorrow, and the dumb questions concerning the science surrounding all of it. And hopefully at the end of this discussion, I and a throng of all the other hard-working Stanford students may go about pursuing this elusive happiness. So with all that said, let's get into the discussion. So let's start with definitions and concrete concepts. Many philosophers throughout human history have labored to find the human good, and many have landed on happiness. And it was those same philosophers that then labored a good amount of their years to then define this term. So, putting these two extremely talented psychiatrists and experts on the mind on the spot, Professor Spiegel first, and then Dr. Carreon, in your practice and in your own philosophical belief system, how would you define happiness?
Well, thank you. First of all, can you hear me without this? Hear me?
You should.
Use this? Okay. We on the faculty are devoted to the belief that there are no dumb questions, only dumb answers. So I'll try and demonstrate that to you now. The famous philosopher Soren Kierkegaard said that the self is a relationship that relates itself to its own self. It's not it's the relationship, but it's the process of relating. And I think what Kierkegaard was trying to point out is that we tend to lose our opportunities for happiness by slipping into thinghood, to being a thing, a type of person. And really it is the brain's capacity to help us relate to people around us, to this beautiful spring evening, to the opportunities we all share here to prosper in this wonderful institution. But it's how we relate to it. It is not it, and we are not an it. And one of the things that I found most helpful in my work using hypnosis is that people can use it to concentrate intently on something, engage with it in a way that changes their relationship to their experience, but do it by suspending their relationship to themselves and who they are. To not let their presuppositions about who they are impair their capacity to enrich the experience that they're having. And so I once helped, using hypnosis, the Stanford women's swimming team to swim faster in meets than they did in practice because it used to be the other way around. And what they were doing was focusing on the goal of beating the woman in the next lane rather than the experience of helping their bodies to swim at their best. And when they started doing that, they actually started swimming faster in meets than they did in practice. So it's the process of engaging that is part of what is uniquely, I think, not uniquely human, but is human and contributes to happiness.
I really want to emphasize the importance of asking the dumb questions because it's so easy to go along with your old assumptions, old beliefs, and the only way that you can really make a change is by engaging that question of the fundamentals. And I think it's a great question. When I think about happiness, I think the part of the challenge comes in the word is used in so many different senses, and so I sometimes like to break it out into different dimensions. So there's happiness as a mood state. Like I feel happy in a moment, a sort of a subjective experience, maybe goes along with certain states of physiology. But it's essentially transient. that comes and goes and is somewhat difficult to control. The word I like for what I'm usually trying to do in my professional work is encourage flourishing. And the books that were so generously distributed today, I talk about flourishing as this state of well-being, wholeness, things working together, kind of across the dimensions, across the spectrum of the human being. A person living as he or she was designed to, or living in a way that fulfills all of the capacities and ways that we were either created and or evolved to be. And I think this is something that is that involves a lot of different aspects of. Sure, there's partly the mood, the subjective, but then there's also doing things that are important, having a meaningful work, having meaningful relationships, being able to be ethically good with a response to people around you, enjoying beauty. There's a whole spectrum of things that go along with capacities that we have that we need to use in order to flourish. But then there's also another state which goes beyond my professional work, which is a state of blessedness. There's people through history and that sometimes we may call saints, who are able to experience these states despite all of the physical things not working, in states of terrible pain or deprivation or suffering, who are able to experience this goodness, this joy, this almost separation from the physical in a way that's really profound. And so I'd say so sometimes that's called happiness. Yeah, if you look at a person who's in that state, yeah, they're happy. But that's not the fundamental thing that's not the most interesting thing about that state. The most interesting thing about that state is how it's able to transcend everything that is circumstantial.
So one question in this discussion concerning definitions and concepts, one to each of you, for Professor Spiegel. So this relationship to self that is explained in Kierkegaard, how would you distinguish that from things like pleasure or materialistic utility? How does one have happiness in the Kierkegaardian sense that is not those things, or perhaps they are? I would love for you to expand on that.
Well, Kierkegaard taught that it is not in being any one thing, but in being a being who can process and relate to experience and create an experience that not only is pleasurable, which is one way, but we can be genuinely very much ourselves in difficult or uncomfortable circumstances, but rather in a state of evolution and discovery. So as you engage with the world around you, with the experiences you have, as you use your brain to modulate those experiences, people in hypnosis, for example, can filter out the hurt from the pain. They can actually go through very difficult experiences and make them experiences of mastery. And so part of happiness is it's not pleasure. It's a capacity to enlarge the experience you have and make it new and different, so that you are validating your experience of relating to and beyond the experience you're having. And that means being transparent and open with other people, learning from them. I heard there was a debate about debates here in a lawn like this, and there was a wonderful freshman who said, I discovered doing debating that the purpose of debating is not to win, but to learn. And when you're in that constant state of evolution, where any new experience can change you, that is genuine pleasure and relatedness.
So one more question for Dr. Carreon before we jump into the scientific means to achieve this happiness. I would love to drill down more into that tripartite framework you just laid out of happiness, flourishing, and blessedness. From which tradition does that spring, first of all? And then could one be blessed while being depressed, or being the opposite of flourishing, being the opposite of happy? And I would love for you to expand on that as well.
Yeah, the idea of blessedness in the midst of suffering is from the Christian tradition, and I think there's a lot of things. There's other traditions that will talk about separation or detachment, or cutting off desire such that you're not. It doesn't bother you as much in a sense. But the fact that the suffering itself can somehow be transmuted into some kind of blessedness is very much from the Christian tradition, and specifically the life of Jesus, who was able to do that, who sometimes in some places called a man of sorrows, experienced toward the end of his life just the absolute worst of the worst in every possible category of misery, of suffering, and yet is in this state of blessedness. That we as Christians try to emulate or aspire to, or try to seek. And so, in a sense, it's almost the vertical plane. We can talk about going from flourishing to depressed. I sometimes think about depression as the opposite of this flourishing state. That this brain condition, or a condition that at least largely lives in the brain, is able to impair a human in just such a variety of terrible ways, kind of broad spectrum. And so maybe you can think about a plane of movement that you go left to right, but then blessedness is a new dimension. So yeah, you could be blessed and not flourishing. There's a story in the book of a woman who was in this state convalescent hospital, and just absolutely had been alone for years and years, was blind. And so I talk in the book about oh yes, going out to the outdoors, which you guys are all doing. That's wonderful. Great start. That's where we want to go. And exercising, and she couldn't walk. And I talk about community, but she was alone. And so all of these things are present in her life, and so she has none of the things I talk about as generally being good for a human organism. And yet she talks about how when she was asked by a visitor, what do you think about all that time in the dark alone by yourself? And she says, I think about my Jesus, about how wonderful he's been to me. and she talks about how fortunate she is to have her Jesus. And it's so interesting that it's this it's almost this ownership. It's the kind of state you could be in when you're in love, or when you're connected with someone. It almost doesn't matter what else is going on, because you have that connection. And I think that's that love, this deepest kind of love can transcend these other experiences. Now, that's like saint level connection. So for anybody who is experiencing depression, whether or not you are a Christian, very much I encourage you to move in the flourishing direction, get treatment as necessary. But yeah, at least as a category, there are people who are suffering that are in this blessed state, and there's people who are flourishing who are in the blessed state.
So I'm glad both of our speakers think that happiness is a thing and we can achieve it. So now we can move on to discussing specific scientific means to achieve that happiness, that flourishing. Starting with you, Professor Spiegel. You are an expert in this area. Can hypnosis help us achieve this Kierkegaardian happiness, this good relation with oneself?
Yes, I think it can. I'm not saying I'm the example of happiness or flourishing, but I'll try and share my experience in helping other people get there. Hypnosis is a simple state of highly focused attention. It's like getting so caught up in a good movie. How many of you have had that experience? You get so caught up in a good movie, you forget you're watching a movie, you enter the imagined world. It's been called believed in imagination. And when you have that sense of intensity of focus, you can give yourself to an experience in which you get more from it, you give more to it, and you don't judge and evaluate it. You just have it. To do that, you dissociate. You put outside of conscious awareness things that would ordinarily be in consciousness. Right now, for example, you're feeling sensations and your bottom's touching this lovely green lawn here, but hopefully you were not aware of those sensations until I mentioned it. Any of you were aware, you're allowed to leave now if you were. So in order to focus intently, you have to dissociate, disconnect from thoughts, including thoughts that could interfere or judge or make the worst of a good situation. The third thing that happens is the thing that scares people the most about hypnosis. How many of you have been to these awful hypnosis shows? Any of you seen that? Where the football coach dances like a ballerina and all this stuff? it creates the false impression that the hypnotist controls everything and can do this to anybody. That's not true. They select people in the audience who are likely to be more hypnotizable. And all hypnosis is really self-hypnosis. You're not losing control, you're gaining control. You know, we all come with these wonderful 3-pound organs on the top of our shoulders that are connected to every part of the body, control every part of the body. But it doesn't come with a user's manual. We're not aware of the things we can do. And one of them is to dissociate and control things in a way that you never would have thought of before. Think of yourself in a way you never would have thought of yourself before. So the football coach didn't think he could dance like a ballerina in front of 500 people. Okay, not very interesting. But I've seen people who have felt demeaned by trauma in their lives. And I had a woman the other day who felt absolutely terrible about having been sexually abused as a young girl. And I asked her to go back and be her own mother, to think about what it would be like for her as a girl to go through what she went through. And I said, answer one question, is this your fault? And she started to cry and she said, no, I'm stroking her hair. I'm stroking her hair. And she called me a week later and said, my psychiatrist wants to know what you did to me because I'm not depressed anymore. So she was able to let go of this rigid belief that she somehow deserved the misery she got. And most of us would rather feel guilty than helpless. Hypnosis can help people restructure that, revisit it, and experience it in a different way. And that can contribute to the ability to let go of the depression and experience happiness.
That story was beautiful. But before I get to Dr. Carreon, I would just like to plow in for 2 more questions on hypnosis. So the effect or the results of hypnosis is focused attention. How would you distinguish focused attention from things like meditation and prayer? And then my second question, just to further dispel any conflations between what has been termed staged hypnosis and what you do, clinical hypnosis. If you could, put those rumors to rest right here and now, that would be great.
Well, stage hypnosis is just a gimmick. It's a show, and it is a part of the tradition. But there are snake oil salesmen for drugs too, and it doesn't tell you what the phenomenon really is. Hypnosis is a way of helping people restructure their understanding of themselves, and it's something that I teach to patients. I've taught to 7,000 people in my career, and by the way, if you want to try it. Being a Stanford professor, you have to have a company. You have to, do a startup. So I did. It's called Reverie, Reveri. I'm co-founder of Reverie. And we have a series of programs. At the moment, 9, there are more coming, that help you focus your attention, control your pain, sleep better, stop smoking. And you get to hear my mellifluous voice anytime you want, day or night. I used to think that it couldn't be quite as good as me in the office. And then I thought, if you're having trouble getting back to sleep at 3 a.m, you probably don't want me in your bedroom telling you how to do it. But you can do it with the app. You can download it from the App Store or Google Play. And it's interactive. So I ask you a question, is your hand floating in the air? If it is, I go on to something else. If not, I help you with that. So give it a try if you'd like. Now there was the second question.
How would you distinguish focus attention?
From meditation, yes. So hypnosis is related to, it's a change in consciousness. And in meditation also, you want to get over yourself. That's the idea. Just let thoughts and feelings flow through you. Have open presence. You do a body scan. You check out how your body is feeling. And you develop compassion, which is a wonderful thing. But I think of meditation as it's a long, proud tradition in Buddhism and Hinduism. It's something that people enjoy and feel good about, but it's a practice. It's not a tool. It's a way of being rather than a way of doing. Hypnosis is also a shift in attention. They both can involve letting go of these presuppositions about who you are. But hypnosis you use to solve a problem, to control pain, to get to sleep, to reconceptualize your experience of being traumatized. And so it's much more a tool you use when you need it. It's more like an antibiotic, and mindfulness is like a vitamin.
Thank you. Dr. Carreon, your clinic has pursued some innovative scientific techniques in treating depression. If you could expand on that, that would be great. And then also, answer the first question, please, and then I'll get into the second one.
Yeah, so I'm the co-founder of Acacia Clinics, where our main office is just down the street, 20 minutes. And so we started doing regular, good old-fashioned psychiatry with medication management, and then psychotherapy, which I want to say something about too, about sort of the similarities of psychotherapy in general, and maybe I'll do that now. So if we want to talk about recovery or remission or improvement, all of that is going to involve a brain change. And so our brains are constantly changing moment by moment. And then when it changes and sticks, we might have a mental illness, say depression. And then when you go through a therapy and it changes for the better, that also sticks. Great. So we're able to make these changes that are semi-permanent. The brain is always changing, and that our attention, in my opinion, our attention is the main thing that's rewriting the script, that's reprogramming the cores in that brain, is reconnecting different parts of the brain that weren't connected. And so what Professor Spiegel's saying about, we were talking at lunch about which particular nodes of the brain are connected in hypnosis. Well, that's different than the nodes that are connected in, say, mindful meditation, where your attention is on your nose. And the kind of psychotherapy that I tend to prefer, cognitive behavioral therapy, is yet another set of connections between different sets of the brain. But the point is, you can direct your attention. You have this incredible capacity to redirect, reprogram, repurpose different parts of your brain with practice. And so, and that's kind of the idea of psychotherapy in general, is you're rewriting, reprogramming, changing your brain in ways that you and the therapist are desiring. So we do psychotherapy. The thing that we do that is a bit more unique is that we also take brain scans looking for these specific networks. It's called an fMRI, sort of a 20-minute video of the blood flow of the brain. We sort of look what's connected to what. We're able to see, well, this part that's usually in control of depression is connected to this spot that we can hit with a particular kind of powerful magnet called a transcranial magnetic stimulator. We can zap it. You can kind of tap on it. So with the TMS coil, you tap on the part of the brain that controls the hand, and you get a thumb movement. You move it a little bit, you get a finger movement. It's really fun, and so we do that. We have to do that to kind of calibrate the machine, and then we move forward to the part of the brain that controls, top-down control or rational thought. And then we supercharge the part that is supposed to be in control over the negative thoughts, the ruminative thoughts, the negative self-talk, and we just zap that a lot. We stimulate that for 5 days. We're able to get these incredible remission rates by figuring out where to go and then stimulating that part of the brain. And the thing that's exciting about that is that this is sort of the first application of what might be the future of psychiatry and neuroscience and neurology. That there's a whole bunch of conditions that have abnormal brain connections as at their root, whether it be pain or whether it be something like Alzheimer's or whether it be something like Parkinson's. We've seen improvements in all of these conditions when you hit the right spot with this little zap. So all to say, it's a really exciting time, but I think the more important point for the average person is that this is kind of doing supercharged what you can do with your own mind, with your own directed attention, and you want to connect the part of the body that is the part of the brain that's connected to thinking about your body and where you are in space and focused attention. Great, then now you're in a hypnotic state. You want to think about weightlifting? Okay, we're connecting the central executive network with the motor cortex. Wonderful. So you're able to direct that attention, and that's the power that you have to change yourself. And we can do it, at a clinical office in cases where things are really bad. But most people don't need that.
So there seems to be a common theme of focused attention. And so, Dr. Carreon, I have 2 questions for you. Is focused attention the most productive, constructive path to happiness? And then the second question, if focused attention is the most constructive way to happiness, what are the ways the modern world makes it hard to achieve this focused attention?
In my opinion, focused attention is the only choice we have. when we talk about free will, it's all, to some degree or other, us focusing on, I'm going to raise my hand, I'm going to move my finger, I'm focusing my brain on the part that moves the thumb. That's the foundation of it. So yeah, but in a way that's sort of just dodging that yes, I think that human choice, that human volition is the pathway to happiness. But what are we choosing? And I think that the modern society makes it difficult in innumerable ways. And I think Professor Spiegel and I both see it in our patients of just innumerable ways that attention is either bought and sold. So there's a whole bunch of companies that come up. You may have heard about them. They're just down the street. Facebook and Google and all these guys. What do? They buy and sell attention. And I looked up the social media companies. It is the amount they are selling your attention for. Everybody think of a number. What's the number? What's the number you're thinking of? Just how much are they selling? How much do they value your attention at?
14
per hour.
14 bucks.
$1. So when you are on, I guess Instagram is popular around here, or Facebook or whatever it is, they're selling it for $1. Like, your time is more valuable going for a walk or talking to a friend or connecting on a beautiful green to think about the deep questions. Like, so they've made a lot of money selling it. So yeah, that's one thing. Social media is a big thing. But even before social media, our social connections really started to break down. There's some great sociological literature on this, but just an absolute catastrophe of human connection. The number of friends people have is drastically dropped. There's a famous book called Bowling Alone, where the author talks about going from I think it was 1985. There were the average number of friends a person had was confidants was 3, and then in 2003 it was 1, and then like the number of people, just massive reduction in connection over the past few decades, even before social media got big, and it's only accelerated since then. So I think those things have happened, and then the other thing that's huge in mental health and human happiness is religious service attendance. In the United States, that's church attendance. That's also started to decline over the past decade after being stable remarkably stable for like literally a century. And for some reason, a decade or two ago, it started to take a dip. So I think there's a lot of things that are happening that make it difficult to pay attention, and the breaking up of attention from being able to read a book to, well, I've got to scroll. If it's not, if I can't get it in 2 minutes or in 140 characters, like I can't pay attention to it anymore. That's a challenge that we all face in the modern world. So, I mean, I'm going to keep talking forever if you let me, but that's a sampling.
Thank you. So now we're going to move on to personal application. So we've been talking about philosophical concepts, we've been talking about definitions, and then we've been talking about those scientific means to achieve those set concepts. But now for the most important questions for hardworking Stanford students. How do we make this personal to our own lives? And I think what would help is if y'all, Dr. Carreon and Professor Spiegel, would give us personal stories of how you overcame depression in your life, how you pursued happiness in your life, and perhaps even in your clinical practice, a more descriptive evaluation than normative. What practices apart from science-based methods, so I'm thinking spiritual practices, meditative rituals, that you saw helped your clients really pursue this happiness that you laid out? Professor Spiegel, I'll start with you.
Well, one of the principles that I use in using hypnosis and the intense focused attention is to focus on what you're for rather than what you're against. Don't let things define you that oppose you. Focus on what you're for. When I get people to stop smoking, I don't tell them you won't want a cigarette. I tell them, think about your body as your child. Would you ever put tar nicotine smoke into the lungs of your child? Well, your body is as dependent on you as your child is. Focus on what you're for, respecting and protecting your body. I've used it myself. I had a dislocating shoulder. I had it operated on, and I didn't want to be any more medicated than I needed to be. I needed general anesthesia for the 3-hour surgery, but afterwards I was using no pain meds at all. I was just using self-hypnosis, and I went over to my medical record at Mass General, and you weren't supposed to be able to do that, but I worked there, so the nurse couldn't stop me. And the orthopedic resident wrote, patient using very little pain medication, we mustn't have cut many nerves. Now, I'm here to tell you they cut a lot of nerves here, but the thing about that is that it turned an experience of just being worked on into one in which I could experience mastery. I could feel good about what was happening, what I was doing. My wife, Professor Helen Blau, Baxter Professor of Stem Cell Biology, wanted to be in control of the delivery of our children. And so I taught her how to use self-hypnosis as the anesthesia during the delivery. Our son Dan was 10 pounds when he was born. That's big. And my wife was saying in the middle of the labor, while I was saying, you're floating in Lake Tahoe, cool, tingling numbness, filtered the hurt out of the pain. And she said, I teach pharmacology here. There are drugs for this. And I said, keep floating in Lake Tahoe. You're doing fine. And at the end of it, I had no pain at all. Dan got out fine. And she had a sense of mastery. She had a sense that she had learned something about herself and her ability to manage the situation. And one of the things that we don't give our brains enough credit for is the ability to transform perception, to transform our view of ourselves. And so the thing, when I'm feeling bad, I think about what I have to face, but I think about it in a way that makes it a lesson, something to be learned. There's an old Buddhist saying that when you meet an obstacle on the road, it's a signpost. And so people can learn. I ran groups for women dying of metastatic breast cancer for many years. And we were told when we started, this is a terrible thing to do. They're going to see one another lie. They'll get demoralized. And I thought, no, there's something to be learned there. And one woman said at the end of one of the groups when somebody had died, she said, being in the group is like looking into the Grand Canyon when you're afraid of heights. If you fell down, it would be a disaster, but you feel better about yourself because you're able to look. I can't say I feel serene, but I can look at it. And you begin to understand, on the one hand, the absoluteness of death, and on the other hand, the miracle it is that we're all alive here at all. And so using these techniques can help people transform their own reality in a way that adds meaning to it. And that, to me, is the best antidepressant I know of.
Dr. Carreon?
I think on the flourishing side, there really is a social crisis, and the university is a little bit of an unusual place. But even when I was here, I think I sort of believed that there's almost like a social famine, and everybody is starving, and so starving people are desperate for all kinds of things to make them feel better. But I think that all of us are going to have to figure out how to reverse this course, and that even small things of having we would have brunches. I would do brunches on Sundays after church, and we'd just get together and talk. And sometimes it was 3 people, sometimes it was 10 people, but it was an anchor in the week. And it was a place that people can go, and that just spending time and energy and money on, like, we've got to reconstitute society. We can't just be atomized individuals for the rest of time, moved around by the whims of corporations, which is the present state of things. And so paying very close attention to that. How can you rebuild in small ways and start small? I think that's the one thing. On the other is paying attention to, there's always something you can do. I tell my patients this sometimes. There's always something you could do to make yourself feel just a little bit less miserable. It's not always the case that you could be happy in any particular moment, but there's some part of your thought pattern, some part of your behavior, something you're doing that's not perfect, and you could do better. Now, and even with severe depression, even in severe depression, sometimes it's like, okay, maybe you can't go for a run, but you could probably sit up out of bed and walk to the mailbox. Maybe you can. I've met people who can't. That's sometimes not the case, but most of the time they can. And so think about, within your capacity, what is something you could do to make a small change, and then have those changes build upon each other to go as far as human effort can go. And I'd say the third thing and that even goes for thought patterns. I think that's another thing that seems to be really on the rise. It's just this almost omnipresent negative self-talk or negative self-opinion, and just starting to fight that. And I remember when I was in medical school, the very first part of the third year, you start to go into the hospital, and all that book knowledge gets put to good use when you perfectly remember all of that stuff in the moment when you're on the spot with your attending asking you the hard questions. But I choked. My first, I really did not do well on my internal medicine rotation. I remember, and I was choking hard. It was like, I might not pass this rotation. And the great thing is about pass fail is that, it's all pass. You have to worry about A's, B's, C's. But like the bad thing about pass fail is that, you might not pass. And so I really started to literally trembling when I was giving my presentations and thinking, oh man, I'm so stupid. They must have made a mistake in admissions. Like, how could I go this far and fail? I got all this debt and I'm going to be able to pay it back. I mean, it really started to cycle, but then realizing, okay, I got to redirect that. What is actually true about the situation? Well, am I worthless? No, I'm loved by God. I'm a child of God. So even if I am a bad medical student, I'm still valuable. What about what this is? Okay, well, all I can do is my best. I'm going to focus my attention on what I can do. And hey, maybe they did make a mistake. I can't control the admissions committee at Stanford, but it can say, here's how I'm going to add some hours to studying. Here's how I'm going to prepare for my presentations better. So redirecting that, and it really made a huge difference. But that is a process. That is a pathway of anytime you're in that situation or situations like that. What is true? What do you know? And then I think lastly is realizing that. And this is sort of the limit of Aristotelian happiness. Like you can work really hard, and that's kind of this basis of you can work really hard, but then disaster can strike. You might not actually be successful. Really bad things might happen, and you're stuck. You're not going to be happy then. That's just not flourishing, and I think that is the limit to a human frame. That and this is sort of some people will go to Stoicism and say, well, maybe if we just figure out how to control my attention to a perfect degree, I won't care, or I won't be able to focus on the negative emotions, or I'll be able to redirect. But it's still miserable. You're just surviving the misery a little bit better. But I think the question that we really need to also think more deeply about and explore, even experientially, is there something more? Is there a way that we can get to this state of blessedness? Is there a way that we can really transcend the ups and downs of slings and arrows of outrageous fortune to a point where we can really do well and experience love for one another and experience the love of something beyond us, love of God, even in the midst of whatever comes our way in terms of circumstance.
Awesome. So I'm going to ask one more question, but before I get to that, make sure y'all are starting to think about your Q&A responses. I believe we're going to have two people holding mics. So once I ask this question, go up to the two people holding mics with your question, and Dr. Carreon and Professor Spiegel will be happy to answer. So one more question, and this pertains to your book, Dr. Carreon, and I would like both of you to answer. And it's a practical question. You talk about in your book, as you just did, pursuing good things. Well, the operative question is, what are these good things? And why are they good in the final analysis?
I think that humans have a capacity. I like the transcendentals, the good, the true, and the beautiful. I think that humans have a capacity, in the same way that we have a big part of the brain that's able to perceive light, and we're able to photons come from the sun, and they bounce off stuff, and they hit our eyeballs, and we're able to turn that into some appreciation of the world around us. I think the same thing is happening with something like truth. That there is a source of truth, and in my opinion, God, that is putting out these ideas of goodness, of whether it's a good moral action, that we see something of selfless sacrifice or a heroic action, and we see that in the same way that we see the color green or the blue sky. And then we say, wow, that is good. Now, I don't think our capacity to see the good is as precise, is as infallible as our ability to see the color green, for example. But even with that, when we think about the physical world, we have multiple people, scientists, who might put together, will come together to collate their observations and discuss, well, I saw this, well, I saw that. Okay, how do we reconcile these differences? But I think that there's a capacity for humans to see the good. And so on an individual basis and in venues like this and smaller venues, discussing it. I think that's another thing that we've really not done a lot of is, what is good? Well, okay, there's good actions. There's good, physical exercise. That's a great thing. And, good food, healthy food. That's a good thing. Social connection is a good thing. Good self-talk, things that are speaking truth about yourself and not lies that are destructive. These are all good things. But what precisely is the good thing for you in your situation? Well, that's hard. That's something that takes discussion. Discussion with your friends, with your pastor, with your mentors, with therapists, whatever the case may be. But I think that this is something we can discover together as we go throughout our lives.
Professor Spiegel.
I would say that becoming is better than being. That what really makes us human is the capacity to grow and expand and learn. To learn not just from what's around us, but what's within us, our remarkable abilities, our brain's ability to help us reconceptualize our experiences, to transform pain, to re-understand relationships, to build a life that is devoted not to a thing like getting rich or getting famous, but to making lives better for yourself and for others, to being part of a community. And I think it's the capacity to not get stuck on one thinghood, but rather be able to suspend them, try on different ones, and learn to be a better person. And that's a remarkable opportunity we all have, and I hope you all enjoy it.
Thank you. So if we can take our first question.
Hello? Awesome. So you guys both sort of talk about this idea of seeing the good in bad experiences, or maybe like transforming your own subjective experience of a, quote unquote bad experience into a good one. But you seem to have like two different takes on it. Like one is like this idea of blessedness, and the other is the idea that we have this like, I don't know, control over our own perception. I'm wondering if you guys could like debate or talk about these two ideas in a way that like joins them. I'm just curious about like having you guys talk about those things.
Well, I think there's the sense in I think maybe what Professor Spiegel said earlier about a tool. Like what are you trying to do? And I think it's a perfectly valid thing to try to reduce the I love that phrase, the hurt, take the hurt out of the pain, and that there's a way that you can transform it, but that's not the same thing as transcending it. That's not the same thing as using that for some spiritual good. In that case, it would have to be there would have to be a spiritual end or a spiritual entity or a spiritual part of oneself that is being not just less hurt but bettered by the experience. And in fact, that's some research that we had done. We were talking about this earlier too. We did a survey called Soul Pulse, and one of the things we discovered was that people who had the highest degree of daily spiritual experiences. So there was a measure of how much a person was flourishing, and then how many stressors or negative events did people have. And so, as you'd expect, as the average person had more negative things happen, their flourishing went down. But the question was, okay, what about the people with the very high spiritual experiences? Moderately high, it went down, but less. The mind-blowing thing was the people who were at the highest, 2 standard deviations higher on that, the slope reversed. When bad things happened, they felt better. They were flourishing. It was even better than had it not happened. And so, am I in that state most days? No. but that is a thing that is possible. And so, I think that there's a sense in which I think these are good tools. But the best they can do is reduce the negative. But I think I'm interested as my own, personal project, and I think the project that anybody can pursue is how do we not just reduce it but reverse it? How can we transform the suffering of this world into something that makes it even better than had it not happened? And that's even the theological idea that why is there suffering at all, and what is it for? And in some sense, for our good, for some good, and not just something to be endured.
It's a very astute question, and there are differences in our conception of it. I guess I would say that part of understanding the miracle that we're all here doing what we're doing comes in part from understanding and making better use of yourself, your brain, your body, and what you have been so fortunate to inherit, however you inherited it. And we understand what I would think of as a divine in the world by understanding what the divine lets us do as people. It lets us help people, and how the way we use our brains controls our brains. Neurons that fire together wire together. And so we make ourselves become even more of our own possibility. And that to me is a miraculous thing all by itself. So I think if you're really genuinely making the best use of the opportunity you have as a person, you are in fact evolving and not getting stuck in being any one image of who you are. You're constantly growing and expanding and helping other people do the same thing.
Is there a telos? Like, if you're changing, is there a direction you think people are going or ought to be going?
Yeah, I think they ought to be going in a direction of expanding themselves, recognizing that they can help other people expand themselves, that our purpose in being a community is to help one another grow. I see that in groups of women dying of breast cancer, that they turn their own fear and pain and disappointment into an opportunity to better understand the woman sitting across the room from them. So they help themselves by helping others. And they see that their own limited view of what their possibilities were is not so clear for the woman that she's talking with, and they help one another develop. So the telos for me is helping other people do what helps you to do as well, to grow and change and relate beyond what you thought you were.
So before we take our next question, guys, we have burritos and blankets. The blankets is for our next part of this discussion. And burritos, they're free, so have some. Okay.
Like quick two follow-ups. Like one, how do you define spirituality in that study? And then two is why I think it feels nice to have that like form of telos or like that direction of growth. But what do you think is the mechanism behind why that's a good thing?
The mechanism behind why it's a good thing?
Yeah, like is there like a not necessarily evolutionary biology is like the way to go about it, but like what's the sort of justification behind wanting to care for a larger group of people? Like I think like intuitively it feels right, but do you have like a stronger reason behind it?
Yeah, I'd say that I think that to Professor Spiegel's point, I think I think that we can see a lot with just paying attention, and so what's the justification evolutionarily or from that perspective? I'd say that what's happening in that study and that's evidence of is what God wants of us. So I'll answer theologically first, which is I like one possible answer of what is the chief duty of man, and it's to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. It's joy, it's enjoyment. It's this, and what is that? And then there's a picture in the book of Revelation of every tribe, tongue, people, and nation standing before the throne. So we could start with a group of 10 or maybe 100, and those people can come together and they can expand and they can. But then you take that limit as x approaches infinity, and what do you get? Is this sort of unification of everything, but and in my opinion, the unification is in Christ. Unification is in that person who suffered most perfectly and completely. And so, yeah, evolutionarily, I'd say that's how we were made. We were made with that as our, we're the acorn turning into the oak tree. But the oak tree is that kind of love, and that we can experience that, and that's evidence of something that we desire we have a desire to become what we were made, what's in our DNA, what's in our spiritual DNA.
I'm going to make my answer brief because there are other people with questions. My reason for thinking that we need to expand our lives by helping others expand theirs is very simple: survival. If we don't start doing that soon, we're not going to survive.
Thank you for your great talk. My question is, there has been a debate between locationists and constructionists on the meaning of emotion, basically. And I was wondering, in your research and in your invention of the 5-day depression treatment, how did any of these opinions, if you have any of these opinions, helped you devising that? And on a follow-up note, did you use any philosophical approaches to think about emotion when you were coming up with the plan for therapeutic reasons?
It's a great question, and I think I was sort of a tag along in the study. It had already been designed. I contributed, but after the design. But as we're designing new targets, it's a spectacular question, and I think that because we're getting to the point where we can sort of arbitrarily change emotion, that we can turn this up, we could turn that down externally, and that may or may not be a good thing. I remember one patient that was extremely guilty for doing something that he had felt was actually wrong in his own opinion, and that just ruminating over that guilt again and again and again. And I was going to, I had the patient just like that before, and I treated him, and he reconciled with the person he had done, and it was a beautiful story. It was Hallmark Channel. So I treated this guy, and he sort of dusted his hands off and said, "Thank you, doctor. I'm gonna not reconcile with that person at all. I'm just gonna, you just zapped my guilt away." And it's like, oh gosh, what have I done? But in the same way, we treat people in the emergency room, no matter how many times they got shot doing whatever that is that they were doing, that there's a beautiful part of medicine where we don't care what you were doing, that's for a priest or a cop or somebody, not me, to figure out what you should be doing. But no, as we think about, I have to ask that question when somebody's coming back in for retreatment. Are you just sad, or is this depression? Because if I miss depression, you might spiral, and it's going to be really hard to fix it. But is this just normal sadness that I can get better with a magnet? Geez, these are really hard questions. And yes, I have been starting to get back to the philosophy, which I've neglected in recent years, and trying to do the science and business. But yeah, I think we really need to get back to that as we're getting more and more powerful brain tools, and maybe changing emotions for the worse. Speaking of which, 30% of adult women are on an SSRI. That seems too high. Now, I get awareness, and we want to raise awareness, and many of the people that aren't on medications, that aren't on them, probably, there's some people that should be, but we really shifted the experience of the adult human woman substantially by having just this massive, putting it in the water, so to speak. And is that a good thing? Probably not. What has it done? I don't know, but somebody should probably pay attention to that. It's not my day job, but that's concerning. So yeah, emotions have implications, and that we really, but yeah, the philosophy is really important. We've neglected it, including me.
I just say happiness is not a right, it's a privilege. You got to earn it. There's somebody over here.
Hi. Okay. Thank you for speaking with us today. My question is to Dr. Spiegel. I'm wondering if you've ever practiced hypnosis with patients with psychosis, or if you've ever wanted to try that.
Yes, I have. In general, people with certain kinds of psychosis, like schizophrenia, are as a group not hypnotizable. We've tested them, and we found that because you have to suspend judgment and allow your brain to try out experiencing things that others would call delusions. that people with schizophrenia are too frightened of to be able to do. Their attention is so fragmented. But I have treated other people with psychosis. I treated a young man who thought he was possessed by demons of Satan, and he was disrupting things in his family. He was hospitalized a number of times, and it turned out that what he was disrupted by was some secret sexual activity by his older sister at home, which the parents didn't know about. And he was told by the local minister that he was possessed by demons. And so he started acting like he was. And I told him to practice having the possession experience and then see that he could learn to control it. And that it wasn't really that demons were possessing him. It was that there was a very uncomfortable situation in his home. I told the parents, not why, to get them to live in separate bedrooms and not have that kind of problem in front of him. And his mother did a wonderful thing. He said he was possessed by demons at dinner. He started lapping milk out of a dish. And his mother finally said to him, I don't care who is possessing you, sit down and eat your dinner and stop lapping milk out of a dish. And so they were able to kind of reconstruct the reality of what was going on. So there are some kinds of psychosis where techniques like hypnosis can be very helpful.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you for your time. How do you approach very nihilistic people who really don't have, belief in anything that has a meaning or something? I think it's easier as maybe Christians to approach people with the center our answer around the idea that we're children of God or you're God's image. But then for people who don't really have any belief or in anything, how would you do that? Especially that I think this is our role as Christians, to be light to the world and help others. So how do you approach them?
Well, I'd say there's a process and a content issue here. In other ways, may be very helpful in some circumstances. But the worst thing you can do with a depressed person is try and cheer them up. To say, there, it's really not so bad. And they're just thinking, you don't get it, Buster, And so instead, I say, I understand how bad you feel, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry you feel this bad. And let me see if I can find a way to help you. And then you can use techniques like the cognitive behavioral therapy that Dr. Carreon talks about, where you help them gradually see that their assumptions about themselves are different. But again, what I try to do is help acknowledge how bad they feel, and use other kinds of treatments like TMS and medication sometimes, but also to help them let go of this rigid image of themselves and just give themselves the possibility that they can feel a little closer to a human being, me or somebody else, even though they feel so bad about themselves, and that they may feel they're terrible, but I'm acting as though I don't, that I like and respect them. And if you do that, you can ease people out of it.
Yeah, I think that's well put, and the idea that there's a degree of like empirical search, that if somebody says everything has precisely zero meaning, okay, well, have you ever felt anything feel even a little bit meaningful? And then, okay, well, maybe do more of that or explore that those sorts of feelings. But yeah, no, it's difficult. But one more thing that's somewhat related is I think that it's also interesting with these like very acute biological treatments to see a non-trivial amount of nihilism is depression. That I don't believe anything has meaning because I don't feel like anything has meaning, which is a perfectly reasonable assumption. But then to see like, oh, well, how's that theory of nihilism doing for you now that you have all these feelings of meaning in your life? It's like, oh, well, I don't think about it much. People don't usually tell me like I converted or like I changed my belief, but it's like it just sort of like falls away, or it's a hypothesis of the world that sort of fades. But yeah, I think that that there's a almost like a biased random walk that people could do with these sorts of things. That even if it is cloudy, even if you're super depressed, there are still usually some little blips of pleasure, blips of meaning, blips of connection. It's like, okay, do more of that and see how far we can get.
Hi, my name is Chinat. I'm a master's student here at Stanford. I'm curious to ask, regarding like how would you suggest us going about discussing happiness in community and fellowship? Especially since, like you mentioned earlier, like some people who might not necessarily have as much of a knowledge would be like, oh, try to cheer you up, which end up potentially putting you in a worse position. And like sometimes I feel like personally, like my happiness really fluctuates with like the time of the day. Like I can get up feeling very inspired and motivated and get to work, but then in the evenings I might go home and feel kind of lonely, and then like doom scroll on my phone, and the next day I wake up kind of like guilty. But then I somehow like practice self forgiveness, but then it's hard for me to break out of the cycle. And it's hard to have that discussion with other people without them just being like, okay, just snap out of it. But it's like hard. I'm just curious to know what are your thoughts about that.
Well, I'd say happiness is a process, not an outcome. And it is very hard to say, I want to make myself happy now. But what you can do is do things that you know make you happy in the act of doing them. And so if you can see it as a kind of experience, a brain-body experience that you can have, then you do it not to make yourself happy, but to work with your body and your life in a way that is likely to result in happiness. But it's the process, not the outcome.
Yeah, I think that discussions about, I think there might be an overemphasis on paying attention to your mood. Far be it for me as a psychiatrist to say you should never do that. But I think that especially this, like, am I feeling happy? Let me try to change that. It's like, it's the kind of thing that comes when you're focused on other things, other people, other ends. And in terms of discussion, I had really a really good experience recently with one of my old colleagues, Brad Wright, who's a sociologist who shifted his focus to helping people increase their sense of meaning and purpose. And so he's got a workshop that he's testing at University of Connecticut. That's just he talks about how people can, when you do this sort of thing in a community, when you start to ask questions of meaning and purpose and what makes you feel purposeful, and what are some imagined careers that maybe you'll never have, but like, what would be lives that you might have wanted to live, or old jobs you imagined having, or what are some things that make you feel meaningful right now? That's a conversation that really brings people together in a way that is remarkable. So we did that at my company a few weeks back, and it was really remarkable. So he's got a book, I think it's called The Purpose Journal. But yeah, it's not focusing on the individual self and my own emotions and whether or not they're right or wrong. That's sort of a gauge, sure. But don't spend too much time in the default mode network part of your brain, and focusing on other activities, other things is good.
I call it the my fault mode network in the brain. That's what we're
Hey, my name is Ross. I'm a sophomore here, and thank you all for your time. My question is this: so when we're talking about things to help us feel happier, to flourish more, whether it's connecting with God or connecting with other people in your community, or doing a journal or self-hypnosis, whenever you're trying to change the way you think or behave, it does take energy, and you can also fall into the opposite trap of trying to become perfect or trying to be happy, and that could take over your brain, and you will start judging yourself for not getting there. So my question is, when do you know when to take the fight, and when do you know when to just let go?
Well, people often say the good is the enemy of the best. I would say the other way around: the best is the enemy of the good. If you're constantly having to strive to do it in a way that you judge as the best, you'll constantly find yourself coming up short. And so it's one thing to work hard and aim high in terms of what you want to do, but it's the evaluation. Are you doing things now that are good just because it feels good doing it? When I first got here and was in the usual junior faculty struggle of, getting papers published and getting grants and somewhere, and I was worried about what I was going to do, I said to myself, you know what, let's suppose I don't get tenure here. Can I think of anything I would rather do than take care of patients, help to advance our understanding, do research and publish papers, and even if it doesn't work out, I will have spent my time very well, and I can feel okay about that. So I think it's a matter of not focusing so much on the evaluation of the end, but on the process of getting there.
And I think that I'm a virtue ethicist by way of philosophy, and so I think that the answer is much more about it really depends on your circumstances, and it's a sort of a skill. that you could practice and you can learn from other people who are good at it. And maybe one more thing I'll add to the generic recommendation for Stanford, because I was here too, was one of the most important decisions I made in the middle of undergrad was, Christian, reading through the Bible. I get to the 10 Commandments and I'm like, okay, doing pretty good at the not murdering people. Next one, okay, no adultery, wonderful. Okay, I'm doing good. Keep the Sabbath. And that one's like really long. The text is like, okay, and then, because God worked 7 days, you work 6 days, and the rest of the 7, you need to work 6 days. It's like, okay, well, have I in any sense even attempted to keep this commandment? Like, I'm a sophomore in UCLA engineering. Like, no, I haven't. I've worked every day. That's how that's what everybody does. And it was like, okay, well, I was convicted in the moment. And this is not what everybody has to do, and this is not the only way to interpret the passage, but I've got to try to do this. And so I just said, okay, Sundays are off. I'm not going to do any professional work. I'm not going to do any schoolwork on Sundays. Come what may. And it really was like, even if you drop out of school, even if this means you can't pass your class, it's like, hey, I get to tell God, that's your fault, not mine. You said to do it. And it was the best decision at that time. It's like, that first day of summer when like you can't even think of what you need to do, that like release of burden, that release of guilt, that release of like, I don't have to do anything right now. I could just, go for a walk or talk to a friend or whatever it is. Like every week, every Sunday, it's amazing. So I think that, the question is, should I strive harder? Well, yeah, sometimes, but sometimes you should strive less hard. Sometimes you should set very clear boundaries about when you're going to not be striving. When you're not going to be working. And so one more thing I'll encourage is rest. And also literally, y'all, like turn your phones off, like put it in some other room. Like there's voluntary sleep reduction is one of the major drivers, I think, of some of the recent increases in suicide. Is like not sleeping makes you want to die, literally. So please put your phone away. And also you feel better. So, even if you're not at the risky end.
These were amazing questions, and this will be the last question. And after this question, we will move on to small group discussion, and those will be held on the on the mats that you see laying around.
Thank you so much. My name's Andy. I'm from the community, and I just heard about your talk, so thank you. I've heard a lot about how the brain and the body are kind of interacting with each other, and have a question about chronic fatigue. And if you've seen sort of transcranial treatments or hypnosis be useful for that. This would be like after a viral attack, and I'm not sure if it's psychological or physical.
It's a very difficult thing, and now we're seeing a lot more of it with long COVID, unfortunately. I have had some moderate success using hypnosis with people with chronic fatigue. Part of the problem is that they just feel totally depleted when they do even moderate amounts of exercise. They don't feel rested when they've woken up in the morning. And so I get them to try and use self-hypnosis to at least affiliate with times when they have felt better and more energetic. And also to monitor how they do the exercise they do, so that they don't sort of go from doing too little to doing too much and then feeling exhausted again. So it's a matter of teaching them how to recalibrate the way their recovery, and sometimes that can be helpful.
Yeah, to the TMS end, I'm pretty pretty optimistic on most treatments, but we've not had much success with TMS on chronic fatigue.
Okay, thank you, Rich.
So thank you, Dr. Carreon, Professor Spiegel. I learned a lot. I know they learned a lot, and hopefully now us as a group and as a community can pursue happiness.